Hi, this is Mrs. Steelman, and I am recording a lecture. This is the first lecture, Introduction to Edmund Spenser, and the first one that you will be listening to in a series of approximately 5 lectures. What you see in front of you is just a blank white screen at this point with a picture of Edmund Spenser. What you're going to be doing is taking notes in your notebook, and this will be turned in during class tomorrow. So get out the necessary things that you need to have, and I'm going to be giving you a little bit of background on Edmund Spenser as well as a different assignment when this lecture is finished. So let's begin. This is about Edmund Spenser, who was a Renaissance poet. He was born in 1552 and he died in 1599. And what I'm going to do is just spell his name for you so you know how to do that. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of information about him. Edmund Spenser basically was writing right around the time that Shakespeare was writing. He actually died about 4 years after Romeo and Juliet came out. So he was a contemporary of William Shakespeare's, and he actually thought a lot of him and wrote poetry about him. So when you hear information about whether or not Shakespeare really wrote his plays, you can get some information from Edmund Spenser about that. Basically, Edmund Spenser wanted to be the best poet, especially for epic poetry, which we've had some experience with that already in class. We've read Beowulf, which came out in approximately 1000, and then we also read Dante's Inferno, which came out in about 1200. So this was about 300 years after that. You're going to notice that the spelling in Edmund Spenser's poetry almost seems archaic, and that's because he requested that his poetry be left alone. And so none of the poetry of some of the other poets that we've read, those have all been translated and have been put into what we would call modern English. But Edmund Spenser didn't want that, so that's why his poetry looks a little bit different. He actually had parents of modest means. He grew up in a house where his parents loved him, and he was one of many children. He, however, did go to college. He went to Cambridge, so he got a very good education in the classics, Latin and Greek, something that Shakespeare definitely would have wanted to have if he had had a chance to go to college. So Edmund Spenser was highly intelligent, highly educated, and that's why he really thought that he could do that as far as being the best poet. One of the most famous poems that he wrote was called The Shepherd's Calendar. And I'm going to go back on that. I think I need to do that again. Okay, so this is how you spell it. He wrote this early in his career, became very famous for it. It was written in archaic language, and it had 13 different patterns of rhyme. So that was something very different about that. He did write The Fairy Queen in approximately 1590. So that was, it's an important fact to know. He wrote it with Queen Elizabeth in mind. As a matter of fact, she became one of the main characters in The Fairy Queen, and her name was Gloriana. So we'll get to that later when we talk about the poem. One thing about him is that he was very daring with language and with poetry. So he actually created what we know now as the Spenser stanza, and that's something that you will be writing in that form during class time. The Spenserian stanza, so I'll spell that for you. That was 9 lines long, and that would be each stanza. It's written in iambic pentameter, so much like Shakespeare, but the last line is a little bit different, and that is iambic hexameter. So it's about 2 syllables longer. It has a very definite rhyme scheme and very definite rhythm to it. And the Shakespearean, or what we call Shakespearean, you could also call it Renaissance spelling, is quite different. He ended up moving to Ireland later on in life, and he ended up living there for the rest of his life. And this is an area of contention between himself and Queen Elizabeth, because she was colonizing at that point and sending out troops to colonize different lands, and Ireland was one of them. So he definitely had his point of view about whether or not he wanted to have Ireland colonized. He wrote something called A View of the Present State of Ireland. And this was a very long document where he talked about the culture and the politics and the religion of the Irish. And he also talked about the English coming in and trying to infiltrate that country with their own government. He was very anti colonization, so you can imagine that he and Queen Elizabeth, even though he had written an epic pretty much dedicated to her, that they were very much at odds about this point. He did other things. One very important poem that he wrote is something called an epithalamium, which is a wedding song. And I believe I mentioned this once before because, let's see, I think I need to change that. This is a wedding song that's written in 5 parts, and I believe in class I mentioned that E. Cummings also had written Epithalamium. He wrote it. It was actually one of the first poems that he was paid for writing by his best friend. He wrote a wedding song for his best friend and his new wife, which was read at the wedding. So I'm going to talk to you about what the 5 parts of an epithalamium is. He probably, when I say he, I mean Cummings, got the idea of an epithalamium probably from Edmund Spenser. So the very first thing is the invitation to the muses. And this is not new to you, because that's one thing that marks an epic. The idea that you invite the muses to bless the wedding, or in the case of an epic poem, you invite the muses to bless the poem. Or what's going to happen in the poem. So, invitation to the muses is the very first thing that happens, the very first thing that's talked about. The second thing is the preparation of the bride. And the preparation of the bride is basically the bride, if you can imagine this young girl maybe in her hut, because this would have been very old-fashioned, getting ready with all her grandmas and aunts and sisters and mom, getting her ready with her dress and all the flowers, and then waiting for her husband-to-be to come and pick her up in his cart. So that would have been what Spenser had in mind when he was writing it. The wedding ceremony is the next part. And this is basically just what happens. It wouldn't necessarily be in a church, but it could be just outside in nature. So the wedding ceremony is described. In the 4th part, we have the wedding party. And this would be the party afterwards. So all of the food and drink and dancing and song, all the celebration of the wedding, which would have been very large with lots of people. And the last part is the marriage bed, or the consummation of the marriage. And this would have been something that would have been dealt with very specifically by both Spenser and E. Cummings. And as I said before, when you read Spenser's poetry, sometimes you have to learn about certain letters stand for other letters. Quite often you'll notice spellings of words with an IE ending instead of a Y. So there's lots of different things that you'll be learning about when you learn about Spenser's poetry. The next thing you're going to do, this is the end of this particular tape, and what you're going to do is go to Spenser's website. So just go to the AP Literature's website and click on that first link. And what I'd like you to do is just explore this site. Go to the site, look and see all that's there. There's a biography. You can read more about his poetry, more about the times during the Renaissance period. And there's an interesting part where you can find out about contests for students or adults who would like to write any of the Spenserian stanzas. So that might be something that you want to check out. So look for something on the website that you think is interesting, something that you'd like to share with the class. Print that out and bring it to class tomorrow. And we'll see you then.